Today, we have our lesson in our first week, our first true lesson, which is why study history. I think it's important to take a moment, now that you're in world history class or AP World History with me, to understand just a few things as to why it's important to take this class, what we might get out of this class, and how can it help us in our everyday lives. So to start this off, what I have are a few questions for you. Now, here's what I want you to do. If we were in class, what I would like you to do is write these questions down. I don't want you to raise your hand or yell at the screen or blurt out the answer if we were in an in-person setting. What I'd like you to do is just simply think about what your response to the question would be. And then, of course, we'll go over the answers here in a moment. Now, you being on this lesson with me can sort of see my notes. I'm sharing those with you. So don't try not to look too far ahead. But here are my questions for you. Who was the 17th president of the United States of America? Think about that one. Number two, what is the capital of Montana? The capital of the state of Montana. Go ahead and pause it if you want. Think about it, see if you can answer that. Number three, very specific one. What was the exact date in which the United States Civil War began or started? Now, if we were in class, what would happen is I would give a few moments for students, maybe a minute or two, to write down their responses. And then, of course, I would say, now, do the answers to these questions really matter? Once again, do the answers to these questions really matter? Now, I would have students raise their hand. Some students would say, Mr. Langle, yeah, here's why. Some students would say, I'm not sure. Very rarely do they say no because they think I'm asking them for a reason. But my answer to these questions, and if they matter or not, really is no. And let me explain why. I think these are very detailed questions. I think they're very minute. I don't think they have a really big impact on the big picture. What I will say is that in my class, I'm more concerned about the big picture, the whys, the causes of major events and happenings, more so than the very small details. I'm not going to ask you questions on your quizzes such as, what happened on this exact date, or when exactly did World War II end? What was the day, the month, the time? I'm not interested in those things. What I want you to understand is that I am interested in the big picture. And part of the big picture is being able to put things in a close estimate of rough historical time. You are going to have to know chronological order. You're going to have to be able to put things in its place. You're going to have to say, well, this happened before this, or that happened after that. Those are the type of things that I'm sort of looking for in this class. It's really more of a big picture class. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot to study. So we can't get bogged down with too many small things. Now, I am a very detailed person. I will tell you that. So I am going to teach you the details. But very rarely am I going to ask you the very specific times, dates, or listing orders of rulers or presidents, something like that, or when exactly they ruled. So just so we have that understood, I'm more of a big picture type of teacher so that you guys can focus in on that. Now, Roman numeral 2 here says, I think this is really important for many of you because I know that not all of you are going to become history teachers or history museum curators or art history majors. So I want to give you something in this class that can help you in your life. So what can history offer the businessman or the doctor? My basic answer for that is that everything has a history. All the other subjects that you take on a daily basis, such as math, biology, economics, think about this. Math has a history. First of all, why were mathematic formulas developed? I guarantee you they were necessary to build something or to keep track of taxation, somewhere along those lines. For example, the Pythagorean theorem. There's a lot of speculation about it. Was it developed by the Greeks? Was it developed by the Egyptians first to make pyramids? Hey, we know it's about triangles. We know it's about math. We know it's algebra. But what is the history behind it? Why was it really necessary? You can learn that by studying history. And you wouldn't know that unless you studied the history of math. Number 2, biology, economics, chemistry. Think about chemistry and the importance of history to chemistry today. Talk about vaccines. Edward Jenner. created the smallpox vaccine by injecting actual traces of the smallpox virus. So we have to understand today the history behind when we have doctors saying, well, the fastest vaccine that's ever been from start to finish put into public use is 4 years. We're making history if we can get a COVID-19 vaccine done here less than a year, maybe just over a year. So take a look at that, how that relates to today. English, language in general, these are all things that have a history. Why was language developed? Why was it necessary? It's pretty obvious, but it's something that's important. Now, all of these subjects are related to history. Let me bring it closer to home for you. Let's take a look at this. Let's talk about if you want to be a doctor. Now, I'm going to go through a couple of scenarios here with you about being a doctor, but let's take a look at the surgical procedures. All right, if we don't have the historical data on surgical procedures, think about all the things that could go wrong. Think about if a doctor didn't study the medical books on if you snip this tendon or if you cut this or if you work around this, what are the ramifications of that? This is why doctors have an intense training, 7-year program. A lot of what they're doing is looking at the history of these different procedures, looking at the history of how bodies react to procedures, looking at the history of how certain conditions lead to complications. Now, have you ever gone to the doctor, just to the doctor in general? You might want to be a doctor, or maybe you're just a patient today, but have you ever gone to the doctor and you've seen this doctor countless times, or maybe you've seen him just a few times, and you fill out all the paperwork. Why are you here today? Oh, I've got so-and-so X, 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 and Y. And then the doctor comes in and says, oh, what are you here for today? How can I help you? He has no clue. Well, in fact, on the outside of your door is usually a medical chart, and it has all of your medical history. And if that doctor would just take a moment to read that, he would get your history and understand that you have this certain condition and you're here to get checked on this. And so that would make you feel much better. When the doctor comes in and he doesn't know your patient history, that's a red flag. That's a red flag. So that's why history is important if you are a doctor or if you're a patient. It's a very big part of every day. I'm going to talk about something that probably will happen in your future, that happened to me in my past, and I think it's one of the biggest decisions that you'll ever make in life, and it's purchasing a home. Let's talk about that, and how can history relate to purchasing a home? Let's say you're a real estate agent. Well, how can you help your customer purchase their first home? What are some of the questions that maybe you've heard your parents ask if you've ever been along for buying a home or you're building a home? Some of the questions that come up: location, school district, right? But also, hey, how old's the furnace? When was this house last sold? How old is the home? Oh, it was built in 1966. Sounds a little bit different than 2005, right? So knowing the history of the home, how old is that roof? Has there ever been a leak in this roof? Has the basement ever flooded? Understanding the history of the home will help you make a very educated decision. So this is how history is all a part of your everyday lives, or will be a part of your everyday lives in the future. Roman numeral number 3, a really important one right here. Should we study history so that we won't make the same mistakes of the past? It's also saying, hey, should we study history to avoid making or repeating the mistakes of the past? My answer to this one is an odd one. My answer is actually no. In my opinion, I think it's valuable, but it's a flawed total explanation to support the study of history. Here's why I would say this. And you may disagree with me, and that's fine. I'm trying to get you guys to think about history today. If this were the case, if we're studying history to avoid the mistakes of the past, we should have learned enough by now to end things such as war, poverty, social injustice, racism, right? Gender inequality. But we still have these things. We still have murder. We still have crime. So if it were the case that we're using history to avoid making the mistakes of the past, then we're not doing very well. We're really failing in that endeavor. I'm kind of going both ways, but if I soften my case here, I would say, however, we can use the study of history to make educated decisions in the modern world. You can look at history to make educated decisions today. For example, in 1918, there was a pandemic known as the Spanish flu, much like what we face today. People wore masks. There's all kinds of pictures of people wearing masks. They were playing sports. They had football. They limited how many people could go to the games. They enforced social distancing. So by studying history and what works to get us out of a pandemic, we're now repeating some of those trends. And if you look at the numbers and the data, it works. So there's a way that you can use history to not necessarily avoid the mistakes of the past, but at least utilize it to make educated decisions. My next statement here is Roman numeral number 4. History repeats itself. Well, this is sometimes true, but you can't use history to truly predict the future. Because really, if you're looking at history, nothing necessarily replicates itself in history because you always have the separation of date and time. If you have an event that takes place in 300 BC and you have a very similar event that takes place today, right off the bat, you have a difference in time and scale. The time is not the same. So it's never truly replicating, but there may be some coincidental similarities. What is important about history, guys, is that it does reveal all that is present. We can study history and we can trace to how we got to today. That's important. That's how we can use history. Roman numeral 5 right here, I really want you to use history to know yourself. What I'm saying about this is that to know yourself, you really need to know your historic roots. Where do you come from? Who your ancestors were or might have been? What religion do you practice? Why do you practice that religion? I bet you it has a lot to do with your ancestry. History can help you understand and learn about who you are and where you came from. In this class, we're going to be learning about many different groups of people from many different places. So I'm sure there's something for you in your history here in world history. Now, history can also give light to where your religion or your societal values come from and what they're all about. I think I mentioned that earlier today as well. Now, the final part of today's lesson is Roman numeral 6. Now, what is the proper attitude toward history? What's the proper mindset toward my class or any history class, or really any class in general? Let me hopefully help you here. In this class, as I said, we're going to be learning about so many different groups of people, so many different places, so many different languages, so many different religions. You really have to enter this class with an open mind. If you're closed off to a certain group of people or a certain language or a certain religion, then that's going to make it very difficult for you to learn about that said culture or practice. So what I want you to be able to do is come with an open mind, be open to learning about new peoples, new groups, new religions, new cultures. That's important. Capital letter B says you want to be able to ask yourself, hey, what was it like back then? I want you to be able to put yourself into the shoes of the people that we're learning about. Hey, what would it have been like to live in 4000 BC? Understanding that there would be no running water, there would not be electricity, you would not have cell phones, you would not have radio, you wouldn't even have television. So your world would be much different, way different. You're living in huts, you're living in mud brick homes back then. You're going to the river maybe once a month to bathe. A very different situation than what we have today. So you got to be able to put yourself in the shoes of the people we're learning about. Next, you have to get a sense for historical time. That's what I'm talking about with chronological order. You have to be able to understand what happened before this or after that. That's really important in a history class. Finally, a little thought provoker here for you to ponder. Can you make it through this class without having the proper attitude toward history? Can you make it through this class or any class in general without having the proper attitude? Sure. Yeah, you could be a genius. You might just be naturally gifted and you may be able to pass all my quizzes without even studying. That doesn't happen much, but it can happen. Okay. My question to you is, in life and in my class, why would you come to school every day just to go through the motions? Why get up out of bed? Why get in full dress code with your shirt and tie on Wednesdays and Fridays in the traditional blazers? Why would you do that and just go through the motions? You're selling yourself short. You should make the best of your time while you have it. It goes by fast. Don't practice bad habits. If you come to school and go through the motions now, what are you going to do when you have a job and a family to support? Okay, are you going to be able to get the job done? I would say start now, focus on the details, get your mind right and set so that you can be successful in your future. That's really important. Probably more important than anything I teach you about history is putting forth that great effort and commitment to yourself, to your family, to your parents, etc. Now, make history a part of your life because, as I've explained today, that's exactly what history is. It is your life. Thank you.